This is a community-supported legal education channel. Find out how you can support our mission at the links in the description below. So the Department of Justice recently charged 2 robocalling companies who were responsible for millions upon millions, in fact, hundreds of millions of robocalls, including those scam calls that your grandmother gets trying to scam her out of money, or those tax calls that you've been charged with some tax fraud or something. Call this number and pay a fee or whatever. There's lots of these scams, and this video will be about the charges and about how those scams work. So join me, let's dive into it. So here is the Department of Justice's press release from January 28th, and it says, the Department of Justice has filed civil actions for temporary restraining orders today in 2 landmark cases against 5 companies and 3 individuals allegedly responsible for carrying hundreds of millions of fraudulent robocalls to American consumers, the Department of Justice announced. The DOJ alleges that the companies were warned numerous times that they were carrying fraudulent robocalls, including government and business imposter calls. And yet, they continued to carry those calls and facilitate foreign-based fraud schemes targeting Americans. The calls, which mostly originated in India, led to massive financial losses to elderly and vulnerable victims across the nation. The 2 cases announced today contain similar allegations. The defendants in one case are E-commerce National LLC, doing business as tollfreedeals.com, sipretail.com, SIP is the protocol that allows for voice over IP calls, and their owners-operators, Nicholas Palumbo, 38, and Natasha Palumbo, 33, of Scottsdale, Arizona. Wow, these defendants are younger than me. The defendants in the other cases include Global Voicecom, Global Telecommunication Services, Cat Telecom, aka IP Dish, and their owner-operator, John Cahan, or Kane, 45, of Great Neck, New York. In each case, the Department of Justice sought an order immediately halting the defendants' transmission of unlawful robocall traffic. A federal court has entered a temporary restraining order against the Global Voicecom defendants. And they go into how robocalls are an annoyance, they're fraudulent, and they'll pursue them. There's been a deluge of robocalls. They originate abroad. The messages are usually alarming. Something about a social security number or personal information has been compromised. I can tell you from personal experience, I get these calls too. It's very annoying as a business owner because you have to pick up the phone. You have to answer your clients' calls. So I've actually resorted to trying to answer when I can, but putting literally on my outgoing voice message that I need you to leave a message because I can't tell which calls are real and which calls are not. And so I need you to tell me whether you're a real person or not by giving me details. It actually has worked for me. It says things like the recipient faces imminent arrest, their assets are being frozen, their bank and credit cards have suspected activity, their benefits are being stopped, they face deportation, or some combination of these threats. By the way, they don't call you when you're being charged with a crime or something. So if you get a phone call that says, hey, pay us money or else we're going to come get you, that's fraud because the district attorneys and U.S. attorneys don't call you before they charge you. They might investigate, but they're not going to say, pay us money over the phone or else we charge you. That's not how that works. In the cases announced today, the United States alleges that the defendants operated VoIP carriers, voice over internet protocol carriers, which use an internet connection rather than copper phone lines to carry telephone calls. The defendants carried astronomical numbers of robocalls, 720 million calls during a 23-day period, and more than 425 million of these calls lasted less than 1 second. And they do that either because there's a human that can't pick up, or sometimes they're just testing to see if someone picks up on the line, and then they put that into a pool of numbers that are good to call. The complaint further alleges that many of these 720 million calls were fraudulent and used spoofed or fake caller ID numbers. The calls facilitated by defendants falsely threatened a variety of catastrophic government actions, termination of Social Security benefits, imminent arrest for tax fraud, or deportation for failure to fill out immigration forms correctly. So let's take a look at what they filed here. They have a couple graphics as well, but let's start going through these two indictments. They're rather long, so we're going to cut them down as much as possible. So here was a request for a temporary restraining order and other relief for ongoing criminal wire fraud and conspiracy. This is the John Cain indictment. He controls global voicecom, according to them. The defendants are voice over IP carriers that serve as gateway carriers to facilitate the delivery of millions of fraudulent robocalls. The defendants thus provide foreign fraudsters the means to access the US telephone system, knowingly passing millions of fraudulent robocalls. Let's take a look at one of these graphics. Here's how they say these things work. Criminal call centers in India use robocalls to contact victims. Gateway carriers in the US transmit the robocalls to victims. The victims receive the calls and send money to money mules or by other means. So, wiring money through a MoneyGram or something like that. And the money is then sent to the call centers in India through their mules. I'm assuming people take a cut along the way, and there's massive fraud within their own system too. But that's what these things look like. It's really simple. Since the advent of the internet, anybody with a decent internet connection, even a not so decent internet connection, can place a voice over IP call. I use the same technology to save money on long distance calls home from Luxembourg. They also released this heat map of 7 days, May 20th to 26th of 2019, of robocalls to different states. And you can see that Texas got 18 million, California got 22 million, Florida 13 million, Pennsylvania and Ohio 9 million, New York 12 million, New Jersey 5 million. And this seems to be pretty proportional to the population of each state. So everybody in the country has been the victim of these robocalls. Basically, if you have a telephone number, you know what I'm talking about. They spoof well-known businesses, legitimate phone numbers. They send recorded messages that are transmitted across the internet. They claim to be from federal agencies, foreign governments, legitimate businesses. They convey alarming messages, etc. They're going to get into this a little bit about how this works. So let's see if we can find that. The robocalling fraud schemes in which the defendants are engaged share the same characteristics. Individuals at call centers located abroad, many of which are operating out of India, bombard the US telephone system every day with millions of robocalls intended to defraud individuals. Many of these fraudsters impersonate US government officials. We've got all that. They impersonate Social Security Administration, the IRS, the Customs and Immigration Services, and foreign governments. And then there's also the tech support ones, which claim to be Apple or Microsoft, falsely claiming that a recipient has a computer security problem and requires assistance. Here's an example. Hello, this call is from the Department of Social Security Administration. The reason you have received this call from our department is to inform you that there is a legal enforcement action filed on your Social Security number for fraudulent activity. So when you get this message, kindly call back at the earliest possible convenience on our number before we begin with the legal proceedings. That number is then listed. The Social Security Administration has received more than 465,000 complaints about the fraudulent telephone impersonation. And that was just a 1-year period. Losses are about 14 million or more. The FTC reports similar losses, 11.5 million, and another 37 million in 2019. So they're on the rise. The defendants' robocalling fraud scheme involve robocalls that originate abroad, target individuals in the United States, all dependent on voice over IP related technology to create the calls. They use a broadband internet connection as opposed to an analog phone line to place telephone calls locally without regard to whether the call recipient uses a cell phone or a traditional phone. The fraud schemes also require US-based telecom companies, referred to as the gateway carriers, to introduce the foreign phone traffic into the US phone system. A foreign call center or telecommunications company that places voice over IP calls to U.S. telephones must have a relationship with a U.S. gateway carrier. Most voice over IP calls will pass through a series of US-based carriers before reaching a common carrier such as AT&T and Verizon, and ultimately a potential victim's phone. The voice over IP providers, primarily for billing reasons, keep records of all the calls that pass through it. These records include the following information: the time and date of the call, the destination number, the source number from which the call was placed, sometimes a real number and sometimes a spoofed number, the name of the company that sent the call to the provider, and the downstream company to which the provider sent the call. These records are generated automatically as the call is routed through the telecom infrastructure. The routing is done in a manner that achieves the lowest cost to transmit a given call, known as least cost routing. Calls may be traced through these records back to their gateway carrier and thus to their foreign source. The telecom industry refers to this tracing process as traceback. Tracebacks of many different robocalling fraud schemes have led to the identification of defendants as a gateway carrier willing to transmit huge volumes of fraudulent robocalls into the country despite clear indicia of fraud in the call traffic and actual notice of fraud. So then they go into the details of the individual defendants' calling scheme, saying that they knowingly transmitted more than 7.7 million calls over 19 days, just over 19 days. That's 7.7 million in 19 days. Of these, approximately 86% were 1 second or less in duration, indicating exceedingly high levels of junk and fraudulent robocalls. A small sample of approximately 330,000 of these calls was examined in greater detail. More than 270,000, or 81%, were from source numbers identified as fraudulent robocalls. More than 106,000 of the robocalls spoofed the Social Security Administration's toll-free customer service number in January and February of 2019. And those were transmitted by Global Voicecom. Common carrier AT&T has notified defendants on numerous occasions about fraud traced back to defendants' operations. These notices look like this. The following calls to AT&T cell phone customers were received using the spoofed caller ID numbers of a non-working number at the US Department of Homeland Security. Callers impersonated US Citizenship and Immigration Services and defrauded an AT&T customer of $1,450. Pursuant to the Customer and Carrier Network Fraud Protection provisions of the Telecom Act and the Telephone Records Privacy Protection Act, could you provide the names of your upstream carriers? We are tracing these calls to their source so they can be stopped. AT&T sent similar emails about impersonation scams to the defendants in September 2017, November, April 2018, and July. AT&T emailed the defendants in 2019. We have been receiving AT&T customers' complaints about spoofing fraud. Callers falsely claim to be U.S. government officials. We have verified this number is not outpulsed as the legitimate caller ID by the real U.S. Social Security, so it's spoofed. US Telecom provided a warning notice in its correspondence to defendant Global Voicecom, August 27, 2019. Captured recordings suggest these calls are perpetrating a serious fraud. Caller is impersonating a federal official. Automated voice claims suspicious activity on your Social Security number. Press 1. Calls are from apparently random 800 numbers or other geographic numbers. Call volume estimated at over 1 million per day. Because caller ID changes with each call, blocking the ANI is not effective, or blocking the number. ANI means automatic number identification, which refers to the purported source number for the call. One of the calls goes like this. This call is from Federal Tax and Audit Division of Internal Revenue Services. That's not even correct grammar. This message is intended to contact you regarding an enforcement action executed by the U.S. Treasury intending your serious attention. Ignoring this will be an intentional second attempt to avoid initial appearance before a magistrate judge or grand jury. They say so, a second attempt, even though it's the first time. This is a final attempt to reach you to resolve this issue immediately and speak to a federal agent. Call us back at a 510 number. Not only do defendants knowingly pass fraudulent robocalls by the millions, into the US telephone system, they also provide return calling services to fraudsters so that potential victims can call them back. These toll-free and direct inward dial telephone numbers and related services are provided in the robocall message as callback numbers and appear to be US telephone numbers, and thus enable fraudsters to further deceive individuals about the robocall's origin and the identities and locations of the fraudsters at the other end of the call. In reality, what appears to the individual to be a US telephone number is actually a telephone number that defendants register to an internet address designated by the foreign fraudsters. Thus, the DID and toll-free numbers can be used to ring telephones anywhere in the world. So then one unnamed US company that assigned 902 DID numbers to defendants did provide warnings that their numbers are being used for fraud. The DID number we show assigned to you is being used for fraud. The US Treasury Department has provided us with complaints like these. Quote, I received a call from a 484 number claiming that I was a subject of Treasury fraud. They said call back to an 847 number. I received a voicemail message with an automated recording claiming to be from the Department of Treasury. The callback number was 847. One of the pre-recorded messages is, Treasury, my badge number is 4874. The nature and purpose of this call is regarding an ongoing enforcement action, etc. Please call back to an 847 number. And then there's a similar indictment against Nicholas Palumbo and Natasha Palumbo, e-commerce national and SIP retail. Let's skim through this real quick. They're also accused of spoofing and making fraudulent calls about bank accounts being frozen, credit card accounts with suspicious activity, recipients' benefits being stopped, imminent deportation. So it seems like they were also providing these services to the same kind of fraudulent callers from India, apparently. This company also does business as tollfreedeals.com and sipretail.com, and they live in Paradise Valley, Arizona. So they were involved with Social Security imposters, Internal Revenue Service imposters, Citizenship and Immigration Service imposters, same as before. Loan approval scams, I don't think we saw that one in the other. Oh, they have included local police department numbers, 911, or the actual customer service phone numbers of legitimate U.S. businesses. And they have similar fraudulent messages. And here's a repeating of some of the information. So we're probably just going to skip ahead. And these guys were also informed by their carriers that this is serious fraud and they need to stop. Please see attached audio and screenshot of the voicemail transcript. Shut down this user immediately as it was associated with the customer account of toll-free deals. Customer. These types of scam calls are prohibited from our network, and further fraudulent calls from the same customer account will result in termination of said customer account. The number is an 844 number, has been removed from your account in order to protect the integrity of our network. This message in particular said, tomorrow, $400 is going to be deducted from your account for the remainder of your computer services. If you want to cancel, please press 1 to talk to our cancellation officer or call us back at an 844 number. They sent 6 more emails over the next 2 weeks. Good afternoon, Nick, the defendant. I want to reach out to you and inform you we have disabled the account of Toll-Free Deals customer due to fraudulent complaints. Unfortunately, we do get a lot of complaints about customers under your reseller account. Our first line of defense when issues like this arise, we deactivate the customer's account. I am informing you that if we do receive any additional complaints about any of your other customers under your reseller account, we'll be forced to deactivate your reseller account. He responded, I'll let him know, and that he's going to port the client's numbers over to a different provider to avoid further action. Wow. And let's see what Global Voicecom. This is the temporary restraining order granted by the court against John Kane and Global Voicecom and Global Telecommunications Services and Cat Telecom. And the judge says, the defendant's continuing violations have caused and will continue to cause irreparable harm to victims across the United States. Immediate and irreparable injury, loss, or damage in the form of payments which victims across the United States will send in response to fraudulent phone calls transmitted by defendants could result before defendants can be heard in opposition. Defendants' violations will continue unless a temporary restraining order is issued. Therefore, they are restrained from committing and conspiring to commit wire fraud, providing or causing others to provide call termination services for calls terminating in the US, or carrying any voice over IP calls terminating in the US. So that's all calls, it sounds like. Providing DID, direct inward dial, toll-free number services for calls originating in the United States, including providing direct inward dial or toll-free phone numbers for individuals or entities, and they're enjoined from destroying, deleting, removing, or transferring any and all business, financial, accounting, or other records concerning defendants' operations and the operations of any other corporate entity owned or controlled in whole or part by defendants. So that's really cool. There's still more here. Let's see what the postal inspector has to say. So this postal inspector is highly trained. In the course of this investigation, records were obtained from Wells Fargo Bank regarding an account held in the name of E-Commerce National LLC with a signer of Nicholas Palumbo. For the time period May 28th through September 11th, 2019, the account received 19 cash deposits totaling $130,250. These deposits occurred in locations across the United States, including Minnesota, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama, and New Jersey. None of these cash deposits occurred in Arizona, the principal location of the business. Within days of receiving these cash deposits, Nicholas Palumbo would transfer the funds from Wells Fargo Bank via wire transfers or checks made payable to E-Commerce National LLC to two accounts held in the name of E-Commerce National at JP Morgan Chase. The 16 transactions totaled $131,584. Through my training and experience, I know that funnel accounts offer the rapid movement of money across great distances with minimal fees and the anonymity of the depositors, since the deposits are usually under the reporting thresholds. The analysis of the Bank Secrecy Act reporting has identified that the following account activity is often associated with funnel accounts: out-of-state anonymous cash deposits in multiple states, rapid cash withdrawals for amounts similar to cash deposits, use of counter deposit slips, individual deposits and withdrawals intentionally under $10,000, limited account credits besides cash deposits, no payroll, no wire transfers, limited account credits besides cash deposits, i.e. no payroll, wire transfers, no legitimate business purpose evident, and a deposit activity greater than expected income. And then he has talked to victims, including an 84-year-old man who is a former U.S. Marine Corps resident of Bell Harbor, New York. He received a message on his phone May 23rd, 2019 concerning his social security number. He called the phone number left in the message back and spoke to an individual who stated that he was from the U.S. Marshal Service and had a warrant for JK's arrest. He then transferred JK to a man who claimed his name was David and that he was an employee with the Social Security Administration. David told him that a car had been rented in Houston using JK's personal info, including his Social Security number, and that car was found by local police with evidence of drugs and money laundering. JK was told there was a warrant for his arrest. He was told that David would help JK straighten the situation out, and that JK needed to protect his bank accounts from forfeiture, that the government was going to seize his funds. David asked JK about his accounts, directed JK to wire all of the money out of his account to an account number David provided. David informed JK that his money was being wired to the Marshal Service, who would provide his money back to him at a later date after the situation was cleared up. He transferred $9,800 from his account. JK spent several hours on the phone during his interaction. JK became suspicious after he wired the money, told David he would not be sending more, and ended the phone call. He then received a call from an individual claiming to have a warrant from the New York City Police Department. The individual claimed that JK had to get the warrant lifted and needed to call David back. JK received several more calls, but he did not answer them. He contacted his bank in an attempt to stop the wire transfer, but was told the money had already been removed from the account. Yeah, that's why they use wire transfers, because the Fed wire system will transfer the money within 24 hours. And then the postal inspector found that the call detail traced back to toll-free deals. Another victim, a 36-year-old man who had recently received U.S. citizenship, was told that the Social Security Administration was investigating his name and Social Security number being used in connection with money laundering. They connected him to a man claiming that he was a police officer They instructed him to go to Best Buy and purchase gift cards using his debit card to remove the money from his bank account. He purchased 2 Hotels.com gift cards for $700 and then provided the gift card numbers to the man on the phone. That's a little weird. I'm surprised people don't see through that you don't need to provide the government with gift cards to alleviate your legal troubles. And that traced back to toll-free deals. Another victim lost $2,200 to a Social Security imposter scam. Here, a special agent of the Social Security Administration testifies. And here's where they get some of those numbers from: 465,000 complaints between October 2018 and September 2019, $14 million in losses, etc. They go back over how these fraud schemes work. This looks very similar to before. They explain least cost routing. They use this graphic. Foreign call traffic goes through a gateway, then gets divided among providers according to least cost routing, further divided among providers who then terminate the call at the consumer's phone through a common carrier. She goes over the Microsoft refund scam. Call recipients receive a message stating that a tech support company is going out of business and that recipient is entitled to a refund. Once the call recipient returns the call, a fraudster in a call center convinces the recipient that the tech company's refund department inadvertently refunded the call recipient thousands of dollars rather than hundreds of dollars. The fraudster then convinces the call recipient to wire the money back for the purported refund overpayment. And here's the source of some of the warnings that they received. Here's US Telecom's letter. I don't see to who yet, but they're asking for assistance with traceback for consumer fraud, abuse, and unlawful robocalls. And then here's some of the evidence that they've provided. And so here's the direct emails about Nick Palumbo's account being used for fraud. And here's the certifications of the US attorney. So that's really interesting. This many robocalls. This looks like 200 plus million robocalls in just 7 days. I mean, I'm not going through and adding up all of these numbers, but 50 states times at least 1 million per state, plus some states receiving 22, 18 million, 9 million, 13 million. Wow. So hopefully those indictments and charges and temporary restraining orders help slow the flood of robocalls that has been ever increasing in the US. It's made using the phone for business nearly impossible, at least for receiving new customers' calls for me on my phone. So instead, I've been relying more on website contacts and things. And even then you've got spam that comes through there, but at least it's a little bit easier to deal with electronically because it's the phone system, which has like 0 protections built into it for spoofing or anything like that. There's nothing that the consumer can do with robocalls except try their best to ignore them. And when you're a business, that often means ignoring a customer's phone call. So apologies to those customers that are affected. I wish that there was a better way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. That is our show today. I look forward to reading what you guys have to say below. Remember, this is a community-supported legal education channel. We need your money to help keep this channel alive and help us pay our people a living wage and keep our efforts going and growing as we get ready to turn lawful masses into a public service legal education company. Thank you very much to those who are supporting us in the month of January on patreon.com/ljfrench and sponsors.com/law. In the month of January, our $50 plus supporters are Apernari, John Steele, Gavin Barnard, Kyle Mudrak, Michael Pearce, Jan Negrey, Spirit Bear, Daniel Perez, Snorre Wisotzky, Blackleaf, Joe Tyson, Eevi, Benjamin Hitov, Stephen, Cute Grills in your area, and Ottah. And thank you to the $5 plus supporters who are scrolling on the screen in front of me. I am Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney. I love you all, and I will see you in the videos that drop. Bye.